Hey everyone, you are listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast. We are two neurodivergent mental health professionals in a neurotypical world. I'm Patrick Casale.
And I'm Dr. Neff.
And during these episodes, we do talk about sensitive subjects, mental health, and there are some conversations that can certainly feel a bit overwhelming. So we do just want to use that disclosure and disclaimer before jumping in. And thanks for listening. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Divergent Conversations podcast. Megan and I are joined today by Jak Levine-Pritzker. She/her is an ADHD coach, mental health advocate, founder of Authentically ADHD LLC. With an online community of over 90,000 people and a robust coaching practice, she has empowered thousands of ADHDers to heal their internalized ableism and shame and design a life that actually works for their brains using a strengths-based approach. Welcome to the show. I know you're a big fan. We're excited to have the conversation we're going to have today because it sounds like you are starting to question whether or not you are also autistic. And that is coming up for so many ADHDers more and more often. And we are excited to wrap up our ADHD and autism series this way. So thank you for coming on and making the time. And now I'm going to awkwardly transition to Megan.
I was like, that felt like a hot potato to Jak. And then you pivoted to me. Okay.
I was glad you named it though.
Where is it going? Yeah, Jak, I'm excited that you're here. I think I see this all the time in our community as well, on both sides. But I think more commonly, the ADHD are beginning to be like, wait, I'm resonating with a lot of this autism stuff. What is this about? I'm curious. So like, what's your ADHD? Let's start with your ADHD story. Like, were you diagnosed in childhood? Was this a later in life discovery for you?
Yeah. And before I start, I really just want to say thank you to both of you. I know that like thank yous can be awkward, but I literally listen to your podcast like hours a day. I am so obsessed, and it's been such a source of comfort to me and something that I really go to when I'm feeling overwhelmed. I've learned so much, and yeah, I'm just really happy to be here with you too. So thank you. And yeah, on to my ADHD experience. So I was diagnosed in law school. I don't even know how many years ago that was at this point. I'm so bad at time, maybe 6 or 7 years ago or something in that vicinity. And I was really struggling. I was getting great grades, but I noticed it was so much harder for me than a lot of my peers. I was staying up a lot later. I was studying flashcards like 1,000 times and still not remembering them. And yeah, I was dealing with a lot of anxiety, what I thought was depression, but was probably burnout. And yeah, I went to the school counselor, was like, yo, what is going on? I'm like pulling out my hair. I'm getting a bald spot. Like something's not working here. And I'm really lucky that she picked up on ADHD like right away and sent me to a psychiatrist. And I got diagnosed pretty quickly at that point with ADHD inattentive type.
That is such a cool story. Like I love I mean, it's easy to talk about how often we go unseen, but I love that you didn't have that experience, that you went to someone and they saw that right away, and they saw it in a law student, which again, there's all those stereotypes of like, you can't be ADHD and like graduate from college or I also hard relate to my first graduate degree. Just my voice today. It's struggling. No, I've got, with long COVID, I've got voice stuff too. And I didn't warm up my voice. I haven't talked to anyone. Y'all are like the first people I'm talking to today. So tangent. Yes, my first degree, graduate degree too. Like all I did was study, and it was always such a mystery of like, how is it that other people don't have to study 24/7 to like get through this thing?
Yeah.
So I definitely relate to that part. Okay, so you've known about ADHD. It sounds like you did a life pivot because you're not a lawyer, you're an ADHD coach. And so this was a pretty big identity shift for you when this happened?
Yeah, I think that when I got diagnosed, I was already, so I went to law school because I was really into community organizing and activism. My dad's a judge. And so, I really bought into the whole, like, in order to really make change, a law degree will really help. It can't hurt. And yeah, I already kind of was clear that I wasn't going like straight into the direction of law. And then as time went on, I just started feeling like this was a really unsustainable path for me. I don't know if I had words for that at the time, but I was just not feeling good. I got really kind of in like an ADHD hyperfixation about health and fitness at the time, became a health coach and was like doing that on the side with all of my free time, of course, at law school. And then when I got diagnosed with ADHD, I, as everyone does, or most people do, got like utterly obsessed, deep dive, and started an Instagram kind of on a whim. And it just really took off. And then I sort of pivoted my health coaching business into more ADHD coaching. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Tracks.
You followed your interest.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I sometimes call myself like an accidental Instagram. I never know what to call it. I don't like the word influencer, and I don't like calling myself an Instagram therapist, Instagram human, like, because it was just like, oh, I want to like think about this, and I like making designs. So, and then it just like took off, and I was like, oh, I guess I should build a career out of this.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
sounds
Lots of
like you're. Yeah. Okay, so when was the moment where you're like, oh, maybe this isn't ADHD, or like maybe this experience I'm having isn't explained by ADHD. Maybe it's autism. Was it like content you came across? Was it like, what was that moment? If you have a specific moment.
I think there's a few moments. So I would say for the past couple of years on Instagram, I had people commenting on my posts going, hey, you're actually talking about autism, not ADHD, and like you need to figure that out. And I think I was that kind of sparked interest at the time. So this would happen multiple times. Someone would comment that, I was like, oh shit, is swearing okay? I can't remember.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sort of like, oh shit, what is this? I would go down a super intense research hole, conclude that I'm not autistic after not like relating as much to the social and communication pieces, and then sort of come back and be like, no, like this is ADHD/OCD/whatever, stuff is going on for me. And then it happened enough times that I really had to like slow down and be like, okay, what is going on here? And I don't remember exactly what prompted me, but I reached out to my friend Adrian. I think their account is like All for the Dopamine or something. I can let you know. They're really cool if you want to connect. And I did a really informal assessment with them, and they couldn't diagnose or anything. We're in different states, so it was more just informal, but they thought that it was possible that I was autistic for sure. And so that really then took me on a deep dive. And yeah, I think that it's the pieces that I have most resonated with are sensory pieces, and then more of the special interest and more of like the criteria B kind of fits. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So is that, so now I'm curious. I'm like, okay, my curiosities are divergent. I am curious, like, what, if you remember, like the content where people were commenting on that, because I think that does happen a lot where we overshadow our own experiences. Like I was doing that with ADHD. I kept thinking my interest-based nervous system or some of my executive functioning stuff I thought was my autism. And then I was like, oh, wait, no, that's ADHD. So I know that happens. And then I'm having kind of an opposite thought of the other thing that I see happen, especially on social media a lot, is people sometimes, I think out of like, maybe because autism has been so overshadowed historically, sometimes people will like mistakenly start monopolizing traits like sensory sensitivities. Like I've had that on my post where people are like, sensory
Yeah.
sensitivities are not part of PTSD. They're not part of ADHD. And it's like, no, actually, we don't monopolize sensory sensitivities. So I also see that, like, where people will kind of overuse that. Well, they'll be like, oh, well, you're talking about autism, where it's like, no, there's actually a lot of explanations for why a person might experience that. So I'm having both of those thoughts happening right now. Do you remember what you were sharing that people were like, oh, that's autism?
I don't exactly, but I do totally agree with you on, I see both of those things happening as well. And I do think that a lot of this was probably around sensory stuff, because I talk about that a lot, because that's a huge part of my experience. I can't remember. I can't remember. It'd be really interesting to go back, but yeah, there were some people who it was like really, really well-intentioned and kind. And then I was also getting a lot of people telling me I'm ableist and that, I don't want to identify with autism because of the stigma. And that's real. And I think that, deserves a conversation. And I know that happens, but this was after I had spent like, weeks and months of my life trying to figure out if I'm autistic or not. So
that is so painful.
Confusing. Yeah.
First, I'm just sorry that happens. And I've gotten comments like that too. And that's just, I think especially like Patrick and I have talked about this some with RSD, like those comments, like, I don't know about you, but I still have intrusive loops. Like I can tell you every negative comment I've ever gotten because they intrusively come to me, even if they were years ago. And I think what people miss, like, sure, that happens where people are like, I don't want to identify because of ableism. Well, I see what happened more. People are like, I don't want to own an identity and take up space in a community that I'm not sure I belong in. And so I see that be the motivator way more often, but then they're accused of being ableist for not wanting, like, so I just feel a lot of sadness around this conversation.
Sadness in that. And there's almost like this imposter syndrome-esque feeling that I keep hearing from colleagues and friends who think that they are autistic, right? They're waiting to get testing done. They've done some self-assessments. Maybe they've done something that, like Jack, like you're saying, you did some deep diving. They're like, I think this is me. I don't want to own it yet because, like you said, Megan, I don't want to take up this space in this community if that's not in fact the case. And then there's almost this like imposter syndrome-esque experience where there's so much self-doubt. There's so much like anxiety and dread about what are the testing results actually going to yield? Because if the result in fact is not autism, I do not have an explanation for why the hell my life is the way that it is and why my experience is the way that it is. And I think that is so complicated and so emotionally taxing to be in that like luminal space, so to speak.
Ugh. Yeah, that in-between space is really brutal, especially if someone is autistic or ADHD and has like a sticky brain. It's really rough. Yeah.
I love that what you said, the in-between stage, because especially like you're in the in-between stage and you're public. And so like that has to be so tricky of like, how do I talk about this in a way that like, oh gosh, how long have you been in the in-between space? And yeah, that sounds really tricky.
Yeah. Thanks. I would say maybe the first time I made a reel maybe a year ago or so. That's like a total guess. Something in, about a year. And what is time? And I basically was saying, I get a lot of questions about if I'm autistic, and like the answer is I really don't know. At that time I said I don't think I am. I really deep dived on it, and there's certain pieces that resonate, but overall it doesn't fully feel like it clicks. Though, I'm kind of that classic, like, highly sensitive, ADHD, sensory sensitivities, OCD, like, I'm kind of in that realm of things that, like, is a little sus, And so I made that post a while ago. I got a lot of really helpful comments and feedback and kind of took a break, I guess. And then I've been really more openly about it for the past, I would say maybe 4 months. I've been really just honest, saying I'm getting an assessment done in 6 days from today, which is really exciting. And I've been really honest at this point, just saying I'm honestly not sure, which is really weird because I was so certain for OCD, which I'm diagnosed with, and ADHD, which I'm diagnosed with. I went into those being like, you can't tell me otherwise. Like, I'm so positive this is my experience. And yeah, with autism, I really feel like I need a professional to help me tease it apart. I'm really unsure. And so that's kind of where I'm at publicly, which feels good because it's honest, but it's also vulnerable. And like, yeah, it's weird being in that in-between mode for sure.
Yeah.
That is really vulnerable. And I mean, your business name is Authentically ADHD, right? So like, I love how you're showing up authentically, because I think there is there's a lot of anxiety around the process of like, I'm going to go and someone's going to tell me, especially now that these things have become more of like an identity. Like, I'm going to be told if I belong in this community or not. Like, the stakes can feel really high. So I'm curious. I have a few curiosities. One, like, will you be disappointed if it comes back and they're like, no, you're actually not autistic. ADHD and OCD explains this. Like, do you feel attached to the identity? Are you hoping for a certain outcome?
It's a great
That's a
question.
great question. Yeah. I think I feel mostly neutral. I think that what I most want is clarity and to be able to understand my experiences and to be able to, I think a lot of what is driving me getting an assessment is my publicness. Like, I want to be able to accurately represent what I'm talking about and have clarity about that. I think the more I've gone into it and like deep dived into it, I think there's several things that if I don't get an autism diagnosis, I'm going to be like, okay, that's fine, but like, what is happening here then? Like, is the sensory processing quote disorder? Like, what is going on? So I think, yeah, what I'm most looking for is clarity. And yeah, I feel kind of open, with the exception of like, then I need answers about some of these couple of things that are going on. Yeah. And I feel like 50-50. I'm like, I could be really convinced either way, I feel at this point. Yeah.
I feel like that's such a helpful frame of mind to be going into an assessment with, of like, I want to understand myself. And so I want to go to someone who's going to help me understand that. I also think that's rare, especially around the autism diagnosis, because of the history and because of the gatekeeping and because of XYZ. But I feel like that is a really fantastic way to walk into an assessment of like, I want to understand what is happening.
Yeah. Thanks. And I think, yeah, again, that comes from being genuinely unsure and having, dive down the rabbit holes. Yeah, there's a lot of things that lead me to believe I'm not autistic. There's a lot that leads me to believe that I am. And I definitely don't fit a profile that I have seen at all represented. And I mean, I have really searched, I'm asking AFAB folks, like, I really, really searched, and I still don't see myself fully in any of those experiences.
So like, yeah, so that is interesting. Like, it does sound like you don't see yourself in criteria A, which is like core to the autistic experience of like moving through social space, like doing it analytically. It comes more like intuitively to you. What is that like?
Yeah, no, question mark. So I don't know. I think that is what I originally felt. I am someone, I've been someone who most people would identify as like very socially, I don't know what word I'm going for here, able, for lack of a better word, I guess. And I at first really didn't resonate with a lot of criteria A. The more that I have learned about it, there are definitely pieces that I resonate with a lot more than I previously realized. And the more that I consciously observe myself, the more that I'm seeing these things. And I really struggle with these questionnaires. Like, I don't score that high on the CAT-Q. I don't score super high on a lot of questionnaires. But when I had someone prompting me with really specific examples, they were like, bro, like, why did you answer no to that question? You just gave me 7 examples. So
I can relate to that really, really hard.
Yeah.
Because I was diagnosed ADHD first about 6-7 years ago, and that really made sense. And all of the questions when it came to autism and doing any of the assessments and testing, the yes or no, like, I would go into my head about like, well, yes, sometimes, but no, sometimes. And then like, what about in these instances? But I'm like, but the answer is just yes or no. So I just have to pick one. And then if you have examples and someone who's really well versed in neuroaffirming care, it's like, oh, yeah, I can list 100 examples as to why that's a yes.
Yeah.
I feel like the autistic response to like those questions is like, it depends.
Right.
It depends on the context.
Yeah, exactly. Like ... asterisk, like, in what scenario are you asking me this question? It's not all encompassing.
It's like, oh my gosh. Like, would you rather go to like a party or museum? First of all, like, neither. Second of all, like, what kind of museum? What kind of party? Like, what time of day? Like, there's not enough context for.
It's horrible. Yeah, I was wondering as I was taking the assessment, sort of feeling like my approach to the assessments feels potentially autistic. Like, I was leaving like 1,000 comments for my assessor being like, I can't answer this question. Like, if it were this, then it would be this. If it were this, then it would be this. So yeah, we'll see, I guess. But yeah, the questions are brutal, and I guess like say that again, Patrick. Sorry.
The whole process is challenging. Like, it's designed 9 times out of 10 to be like such a sterile environment where you're going there purposefully for a reason, but it feels like meta in a way. I'm like outside of myself, watching myself do this stuff. And unless you get a really good testing psychologist, like someone who does the deep diving, like Megan's talked about her process, like really going into special interest deep dives and things like that, instead of just reading off question after question, it's so complicated.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of what's tricky is like, it's supposed to be sterile because so with assessments, it needs to be standardized. So, and that's part of what makes it standardized. But then you look for the process, right? So like there's some assessments, a lot of them where you're literally as the assessor, they give you, there's like a script, like try your best. Like that's all, like on cognitive, as if there's questions people have on cognitive tests, it's like, I can either repeat the question or it'd be like, try your best. But part of the assessment is that like, it's not just how people are answering these, you're watching how they're answering these, right? So like, I'm paying attention if someone's struggling with like, do you like museums or, parties? Right. It's like, what is their process around this struggle? Yeah. So there's a lot that goes into it because you're also observing, but that is part of what makes, I think, assessments feel really like they're supposed to feel cold, which that to me as an assessor never felt natural. But they're not necessarily supposed to feel cold, but there is supposed to be kind of a detachment in the sense of it is supposed to be like a sterile,
right?
Like standardized process.
I'm glad you named that. I think as the only person in this room right now who does assess or who has done and taught assessments as yourself, sitting on the other side of it when you don't have that context can feel really murky. I would almost like evaluate every question I responded to because I was constantly evaluating the environment and how I was sitting in it, how I was being asked the question, how I thought they were reacting to specific responses. Like it was a strange experience for me and I did not enjoy it.
It's supposed to be strange, or like it's not supposed to be strange, but I don't like really know a way. I mean, there are people who do like collaborative assessments and do it from a different frame, but like kind of traditional assessments, there's no really way around it where it's not a strange experience.
Yeah, I really appreciate you actually. It feels calming to me to hear that a lot of the process is being studied rather than just the content. I mean, that feels like very weird in a lot of ways, but because the content feels so hard for me to answer, I have such a fear that I'm gonna like swing it in one way or the other based on what I say. And it actually feels reassuring to know, like, yeah, the assessor is also just looking at how you're going about this, not just the information that you're providing. Kind of takes off some pressure, I feel. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it does for a lot of people. And it does have a range for like how the assessor works, but I think about it as like quantitative and qualitative. So like in research, we've got quantitative, which is like data, numbers, and then qualitative, which is the story, the narrative. And in a good assessment, it's both, there's quantitative and qualitative. So there's like, yeah, there's the scores on the assessments, but then there's the observation of like, and that's the qualitative. And so a good assessment is a marriage of the quantitative and qualitative, so that if someone has 10 pages of notes around like, well, I can't answer this question because I don't have enough context. Like that's really rich qualitative information for the assessor.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I know that I'm sort of the questionee here, but could I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I love that.
Cool. So yeah, I guess first of all, before I do that, I just want to name that my assessor is someone that specializes in working with high masking women for the most part. So that feels really good for me. I've also seen her share some of your graphics and I'm like, yes, okay, cool. So we're in the same world, we're on the same page. That feels really good. Okay, so my question is, yeah, I'm curious if you have seen folks who like definitely check criteria B boxes and meet and like definitely have some criteria A. I don't feel like I experience criteria A to a level that feels disabling for me. But I do feel like I have a lot of criteria A differences that are present, especially when I really look more. So things like really just wanting to talk about my interests, getting really like disappointed if I'm in a conversation and it's like not around my interests. Definitely stuff in the realm of like humor, just no, does not do it for me. I never find things funny. I find weird things funny that other people don't find funny. And I also have like an experience of being kind of like on socially is the best way that I can explain it. Like I feel very aware of myself. I feel very on. I'll often leave conversations being like, did I balance that conversation well? Does that person like me? Like, how did that go? So there's like stuff there for sure. And I could continue going, but not scripting, not like a lot of those more classic things that I hear. I know you can't like fully answer this without knowing like my full clinical picture, but like, have you seen that thing at all, that combo?
I have, and it's tricky.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, I'm sitting here, I'm like, I want to know what your assessment comes back with. Like, that is like, to me, those have been the most tricky assessments when it's like, okay, I see criteria B, because criteria A it has to be there. Like,
of course.
And with that of like considering masking. So I have seen that, and those are like the most complex cases to sit with. And this is where, so I totally 1000% understand why it's so offensive to be like, everyone's a little autistic or everyone's a little ADHD, like not cool. But at the same time, I think sometimes then we miss like, well, there are like some people can have more autistic traits than other people. And ADHDers are more likely to have autistic traits than a neurotypical. Autistic people are more likely to have ADHD traits than a neurotypical. And I don't think there's enough conversation around like allowing for the possibility of, someone could be ADHD, OCD, and have like a bunch of autistic traits, but like be below threshold. Threshold is this weird kind of magical thing. So first, I just feel like that's not talked about enough.
Yeah, I agree.
Second, with the criteria, that does get tricky because it's also like there could be ADHD reasons where small talk is hard for an ADHDer. So it's about drilling down to like the experience. Like it always goes back to that subjective experience around like, what is it about small talk? What is it about all of these pieces? And again, that can be tricky to tease out. But there is, I mean, this is where it's really good you're working with someone who knows masking, because I do think a lot of us, when we have masked these things like our whole lives, these things become so automatic that we're not aware until we're aware. But yeah, I have seen it, and these are assessments that are complicated.
Yeah, thanks
So
for naming that.
I get why you've been like, I don't know, my people keep telling me I'm autistic, and then I look and I don't think I am, but like maybe like I get why you're confused.
Yeah. And then I feel like what's happening too is I'm becoming so aware of myself socially that I'm in this phase right now where eye contact, for example, is feeling, I'm like so much more aware of eye contact feeling more uncomfortable. But I'm like, is that because it's always felt uncomfortable and I've never noticed? Or is that because I'm like hyper aware of observing my eye contact right now? So yeah, it's tough. I appreciate just like the acknowledgement that it's complicated, because it does feel that way. And especially on social media, I feel like there's not space for that to be allowed.
No.
Yeah, there's a lot of like, and I mean, just in our world in general right now, there's so much like all or nothing thinking. But these things are truly way more complex than that conversation allows for.
And that's why, like, I was going to mention, Megan's misdiagnosis, Monday graphics, and everything that compares in those Venn diagrams is so helpful. And then like books that Dr. Donna Henderson wrote, like, Is This Autism? Things like that are so helpful to assess some of this apart when things feel like there's so much overlap.
Yeah.
And, a lot of my content speaks to the autistic ADHD experience and the like push-pull and the like tug of war existence that it feels like a lot of the time. And I'll get comments constantly that are like, I'm ADHD, but all of these things sound like me. Or I'm autistic, but all of these things sound like me. Am I also autistic? Am I also ADHD? I can't say that on an Instagram post. I have no idea. Maybe.
Yeah.
I have no freaking idea. Like, you should probably look more into that stuff. And deep dive the stuff that's out there. But it's really complicated.
Yeah, it is. I love those posts that you make, by the way, and I so resonate with them. I definitely tend to resonate with AuDHD content a lot, for sure, and that kind of like tug of war experience. So, but yeah, I get the confusion, and it's so hard to know. It's so hard to know.
It's so hard to know, especially for the three of us who have social media followings. Like, you're going to get comments from anyone and everyone, and it's really hard to just answer in a generic sense of like, I don't want to give you this advice because I don't know. Like, I don't have a clear picture or understanding of anything about you. And I'll get a DM with like 6 pages of info, and then I'm like, oh, now I have a good understanding.
This is where you can take a pro tip from me and just turn comments off.
Seriously, yeah. I love your boundaries on social media. It's so good.
I go back and forth. Like like always, I'm like, maybe I should turn them back on. But then whenever I do, I'm like, yep, this is why I keep them off.
Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking about like the process of sitting in the space with it. And it sounds like, like Megan mentioned, just being super curious and intentional about it is a really wonderful way to go into a process where you're not entirely sure what the outcome is going to be. So I commend you for sharing that, and also just sitting with it as comfortably as you can, because it can be really hard to hold that and just like the waiting game and just trying to figure out. And that was for me, the driving force behind an autism assessment was I want to understand myself. Like, I really want to figure a lot of this out because I don't feel like I have all the answers. And I think when we're seeking that clarity, that can be a really challenging mental place to be in a lot of settings too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you go into your assessment clear, or were you're saying you were kind of in that unsure place as well?
I was definitely unsure. I had friends of mine who told me to pursue it, and they were pretty confident in what the
Okay.
outcome was going to
Yeah.
be. I think I was in a place of much more internalized ableism at the time where I
Yeah,
was just like
for sure.
not autistic because of
Yeah.
example A, B, C, D, E, F,
Yeah.
E.
Mhm.
When I got my results back, and I've said this many times on here, but like I told my wife first and she was like, yeah, no shit. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's not exactly what I was looking for, but I guess. So
Yeah.
That would be an
Yeah.
interesting conversation, like the different spaces we're in when we go into an autism assessment. Because I would say the majority of people like that I know go into an assessment already self-identified, and so the stakes feel really high.
Mhm.
And I just think that changes the nature of an assessment so much. I mean, that's where I like when I got diagnosed, like I had already self-identified. I was already creating content.
Mhm.
And that really does change the experience, which is that'd be interesting. Like that, I feel like that part of the assessment process isn't talked about enough. And I hear it talked about from assessors of like, that's a hard way to go in as an assessor when
Mhm.
someone is already really attached to an identity because part of an assessment, like you need to go in with a lot of openness and curiosity. Maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe it's that.
Right.
And I think that has changed. Like that's part of the flavor of autism assessments at least in the States right now in adults. I'm just kind of riffing at this point, but
no, that's a great point because I think that can almost impact the way you respond to certain responses and answers too, right? If I'm so attached to this identity that I have self-identified with, and this question feels like it's one of those on the fence questions, am I going to lean more right or left because I'm so invested in the outcome?
and then is it going to look like I'm malingering
Right.
because
Yeah, exactly.
I'm so invested in the outcome, and because I've heard all the scary stories about how often autistic people are invalidated.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like I was talking about how important a sterile environment is. Like adult autism assessments, given the state of affairs, is not a sterile environment because we're coming in with those of us who are already attached to the identity are coming in with fears of being invalidated. And then assessors might be coming in, depending where they're at, they might be coming in with like, oh, it's another TikTok assessment, or they might be coming from a neurodiversity affirming framework, which would be very different. But like, yeah, it's just, it's not a sterile assessment environment given the conversation around adult autism right now and how polarized the views are.
That's a great point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like, and I'm very open to this being internalized ableism. I'm not really sure what's going on here for me, but it might be like OCD. I don't really know. I feel like whenever there's a question that I could lean one way or the other, I'll answer it away from being autistic. And I really don't think it's because I don't want to be autistic. I mean, I have so many autistic friends. I love autistic culture. I love autistic people. Like I really don't think that's what's going on here. I think it's like I have this fear for some reason that I'm going to go into this assessment, and because I'm there, she's going to think, okay, this person wants an autism diagnosis, and I feel like I'm going to somehow like manipulate the assessment to like say I'm autistic if I'm not, which is just like a point of I just want like accuracy. That's really what's going on there. Yeah.
So when I like in my first 6 months discovery, I think I retook like the screeners, like the CAT-Q, the AQ,
So
the
many
RADs, like
times.
so many times. And this time I was like, okay, I'm going to answer so conservatively. Like, and seriously probably took all of them like 10 or 20 times.
Me too.
And with being with like, okay, well, I could say yes, but I could say no. So I'm going to say no this time.
Yeah.
So I did the exact same thing. And it was
Yeah.
the like fear, again, that fear of like, I don't want to take up space and falsely claim this if I'm not right about this.
Mhm.
And that was such a big fear. Like, I don't have that anymore because I'm
Yeah.
3 years in and my autism feels very like, it feels more evident now than it did 3 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
But in that first year, that was that was like such a really big caution of me around
Mhm.
wanting to be accurate and not wanting to claim something that wasn't mine.
Yeah, it's nice to hear I'm not alone in that. I've also taken the test like so many times, which actually leads me to like a kind of side note topic question. Can I drop that in quick?
Yeah.
Okay. The assessment that I score like wildly high on, like higher than even a lot of my AuDHD friends, is the Monottropism or Tropism, I don't know how you pronounce it, questionnaire. And I don't know, I'm curious if you have thoughts on that. I've heard sort of like, from what I've researched, it's obviously started as a theory of autism, but I know a lot of ADHDers can have higher monotropism, but it seems like the research is that like AuDHD tends to be highest. What do you see with monotropism and across these neurotypes?
So monotropism is like still relatively new to me, as like I think I've come across this concept in the last year or so. And I think I've seen the screener that's floating around that you might be talking about, and I did note on there that they're saying like, okay, this is a common trait in autistic people, but this isn't diagnostic of autism. And I think this is part of like the shift we're living in is most of the like standardized screeners that we have out there and assessments are built on the DSM. They are built on this deficit framework. Now that we have more autistic researchers and clinicians out there, we're getting to the question beneath the so-called symptoms of like, well, why do we do that? And so now we're seeing more like screeners for like monotropism of like, because this is an organizing principle that explains the autistic brain. I really hope in the next 10 years we see more of those sorts of like screeners and tools enter the assessment process. So that doesn't fully answer your question, but it's more this issue of like, we're starting to understand, like I just read a really interesting article that just came out about flow state and how it was recontextualizing autism, again, quote, symptoms as like, these are behaviors of like when a person is trying to get back into flow or when they're not in flow state. And basically autism is a desire to always be in flow state. It wasn't quite said like that. But there's still a lot we don't yet know about like these universalizing theories of autism or of ADHD of like, okay, is this truly distinct just to autism? But I mean, monotropism is a like very autistic experience. But yeah, so I don't know that I fully answered your question, but yeah.
I think it's great. I love that you're just acknowledging that there's a lot that we still don't know. And I think that's something that's also really left out of the dialogue a lot, but like, there's just still so much unknown. And we're in a lot of ways just kind of like taking our best guesses. And some of those are more educated than others. And we're really new to figuring it all out.
We're new. And then like the clinical side of things, right? So for those who are going the medical route, like, they have a lot of catch up to do. And so, and that's, I mean, I feel like that happens in kind of all scientific fields of like, you learn a thing and then it takes 20 years for it to trickle down. Hopefully it won't take 20 years, but, so there's also that just, science moves slow.
Yep.
Are we at that time? Reading the energy. This was a cool conversation. I'm actually happy we wrapped up the 2 series back to back like this. I think a lot of people are in this space that you're in, Jak. Just that questioning phase and really wanting to figure out the answer and the solution and some clarity too. And I hope you will keep us informed on how it goes and if you're willing to. And
Yeah,
I'd really be
absolutely.
interested in that for you.
Yeah, sorry. My cat's meowing in the background. I don't know if you could hear it, but it definitely distracted me, so I apologize. But yes, I will absolutely keep you in the loop about it. I think it'll be really interesting to see what we find out. I should know in a few weeks.
Oh, wow. That's a fast process. I will be so curious. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for having me. Again, it's just really cool to get to talk to you both and hear both of your experiences more. And yeah, I'll be a little test subject for some of these questions.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I really appreciate your vulnerability just because I think there are so many people who live in this liminal space, this in-between time, and it can be a really anxiety-inducing time. So I really appreciate you sharing what this process has been like for you, both as a human, but also like to be doing this process publicly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Jak, will you tell the audience where they can find more of what you're doing and how to contact you if they want to work with you?
Sure. Yeah. So I hang out, I would say, mostly on Instagram. So that's Authentically ADHD. And then I have a website, www.authenticallyadhd.com. You can read about the different stuff I'm doing or send me an email through there. And yeah, I've got a bunch of got a membership and coaching and stuff like that. So, and yeah, if anyone is also in this process that's listening and wants to share their experience with me, I'd be super down to chat.
Cool. I love that. And we'll have that in the show notes for all of you so that you have easy access to all of Jak's information in case you want to look up what they're doing. And really, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this journey for yourself. This is a really cool experience to kind of talk about publicly.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And to everyone listening to Divergent Conversations, new episodes are out on Fridays on all major podcast platforms and YouTube. Like, download, subscribe, and share.